Hello, welcome to Market Avenue. My name is Edward Nyako. One of the ultimate desire of ECOWAS is to ensure smooth trade among countries, that is movement of people and goods across borders. But with COVID-19 on the radar, borders were closed. And I want to make a quotation. Someone said, you cannot contain the virus by simply doing lockdown because we need to trade. Other than that, the people within the country will suffer, unquote. Today we're going to talk to the president of Borderless Alliance in the person of Ziad Hamoui. He's in the studio to talk to us about how COVID-19 has hit cross-border trade in the ECOWAS region. What can be done to ensure that as gradually we ease the restrictions, trade can pick up once again. Before we continue, let's pick the base language for today. Hello, welcome back. It is midweek trading on the Ghana Stock Exchange. And let's see how the equities perform on the Accra Bourse. And that is, today we're seeing a little increase here in terms of the composite index by 1.8 points. And then the financial index also was up 3.27 points, mainly because it was driven by Cal Bank, which witnessed a price change of 0.03 pesos. And the year-to-date change is still in negative territory. That is negative 0.9% as against negative 1.24% in the financial index segment. And let's look at the volume of shares that were traded today. Volume of shares traded today stood at 115,947 as against 4.5 million yesterday. That was Tuesday. And then the value was 29,228 Ghana cedis, 98 pesos. So if you compare yesterday's trading, we were talking about millions, and then today we're doing 29,000, not so much. But the stock, the market capitalization is still at 63.7 billion Ghana cedis, even though it's increased a bit. Now let's look at how the various equities fared in terms of total shares that were traded today. So Cal Bank led the pack with 10,000 shares that were traded at 8,500 Ghana cedis. And then we saw EGH also doing 300 shares, and then followed by Farmwork 296. We had Guinness Ghana doing 45, and then Goil 2,630, MTN 5,216, 94,000 by Produce Buying Company, that is PBC, and then Societe Generale 2,500, and then total comes to 115,947. So the only equity that registered price change was Cal Bank, and that was 0.03 pesos. So that is how the market fared for today. And we're going for a short break. When we come back, we're going to look at how COVID-19 has affected cross-border trade in the ECOWAS region, and especially as Ghana has become the hub for intercontinental free trade in Africa. Ziad Hamoui, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great. It's about 10 years since we met.
Yes.
At Aflao.
Yes.
What were you going to do then?
We were going to inaugurate the first Border Information Center,
okay,
which was an outlet that was supposed to give information to users and economic operators about what the regulations are and whether they will have some some issues when they are crossing the borders with their trades and goods, and to disseminate information. So the first set of Border Information Centers was inaugurated at the time. One from the Ghana side in Aflao, and the second was from Kodjo-Vyakope in Lome. So when we went there, we inaugurated the first. The sector commander ushered us into the second one, to Lome, and then we had a small opening ceremony. From there on, we moved over the years to also open a few additional ones across West Africa, because Borderless Alliance is all about the free movement of goods and people across West Africa and the advocacy. And so that was where it all started.
Wow.
And that's like just yesterday.
It's amazing. 10 years is just like yesterday.
Just like yesterday.
Wow. Great. Now, so if you look at what you've done, Borderless Alliance, have you done any assessment to see how your advocacy has helped in pushing intra-regional trade?
So here's the thing about advocacy, is that you can come with the best basis of information and evidence, and you will present your evidence and your findings and your suggestions to the policymakers. Because advocacy is all about the policy engagement between who we represent, in this case, the private sector, and then the policymakers. And you say, look, these policies are not being implemented correctly, or there's a challenge in this particular area, and we suggest that you do this. And so you get to the, first of all, the decision to implement certain reforms, and that starts the beginning of a policy process or a reform. But then the follow-up is usually where most of the policy engagements, not just at advocacy level of a non-profit, but basically with the commitments of most African countries in West Africa or outside of West Africa, fail the test most of the time. You might, and I believe, in summary, the onus of the responsibility for the implementation of policy reforms rests solely on the policymakers. So you need the leadership that will take up the recommendations and the suggestions and then pushes it down for implementation and enforcement. And enforcement is an area where there is a lot of issue. We have witnessed over the past few years as Borderless Alliance some ups and downs with regards to the policy results. In some countries, the same trip where we went, for example, to Lome, when we presented our findings over that same period to the Ministry of National Security in Lome, they decided that they are going to completely abolish the checkpoints from their side of the roads. And so all of the checkpoints in Lome have been removed since that time. Even today, as we are speaking, as you cross from Aflao into Togo and you are continuing your journey towards Benin, you will notice really that there are no checkpoints along the roads going there. So the political leadership in Togo took a decision in 2011, 11 years ago,
Yes,
and it's still standing. In other countries, you will find out bouts of vibrance, and then the momentum stutters and falls down. So, and the reason I'm taking my time in explaining this is because the question you ask is something that is within the discussions, the ongoing discussions that we have with our partners, our development partners, our regional economic community partners, about the real impact of advocacy. And you say, look, if you tick the mark that, of policy reform, it doesn't mean that you have completely succeeded. Because sometimes you tick the mark and you come up and you issue your statement and you say, we commit to remove barriers for all transit trucks passing through our country, which has happened frequently in Ghana over the past few years, for example. But now if you go back to the sector command or even to the IGP or the police in Ghana and tell them, well, you said that a few years ago, so how come? They'll say, oh, in fact, something, we are moving forward. So it's not always the same level of results with policy, especially when you don't have the mechanisms to enforce the policy implementation as a non-profit organization, as a regional association. And it says a lot. And it doesn't help a lot that within ECOWAS, for example, we lack since the creation of ECOWAS in 1975, we lack a clear dispute resolution mechanism.
I am coming to that. I wanted to, before COVID hit,
Right.
before COVID hit, you will realize that Nigeria shut its borders, and I witnessed a lot of Ghanaian companies that were behind the border. They had their goods spoiled, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then COVID hit. And this is the work that you're doing. How did that, which happened in Nigeria, affected or brought to bear the need for some reforms or some of the things that we need to do to enhance, facilitate movement of goods and people?
So here's some context and a background to where we were before COVID hit and where we stand at the moment. Because in July 2019, if you recall, we were all celebrating the official launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area in a flourishing ceremony that took place in Niamey, in Niger. Because the president of Niger, the former president of Niger, was designated Mamadou Issoufou was designated as a champion of African Continental Free Trade area. And so the current president is also assuming, carrying the mantle from the past president. So that's why we went to Niger. And the spirits were up in July 2019. However, within a month's time, we heard about the sudden closure of the borders from Nigerian side. At first, the reason was because of smuggling that was taking place from neighboring Benin, which seems to be importing unusually large amounts of a type of rice that they do not consume, which finds its way eventually into Nigeria. And this brings in issues of rules of origin and smuggling and lots of border dynamics. And then there were issues at the highest level, politically speaking, in order to try to solve this impasse. And as you properly said, there were many drivers, Ghanaians, Togolese, Beninois, or even Ivorians, who spend weeks and weeks. Someone actually counted 100 and something days at the borders. And we had our deputy minister at the time, if I remember correctly, Carlos Ahenkura, who went to the border to talk to the economic operators communities. And then we had several trips, interventions, high-level interventions, joint interventions between the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who went to visit their counterparts to say, look, there are issues. And at the time, of course, now we are moving towards the start of COVID. But then there was a 10-point condition, list of conditions that Nigeria has set from its Niger and Benin counterparts before reopening the borders, including the demolishing of some warehouses which are situated outside of Nigeria, which is allegedly being used for moving into Nigeria, but is interestingly managed by Nigerians who are not living in Nigeria. So things were a bit complicated, and you realize that there was a need for some quiet diplomacy. The bottom line for this is that all of this would not have happened if we had a clear dispute resolution mechanism, which would say that Benin, you are flouting the rules, stop smuggling to Nigeria, this is the penalty, or these are the sanctions. Or Nigeria, you are flouting the regulations, this should not continue, this is what you are going to be penalized for. Because obviously when the head of the regional economic community is based in a country like Nigeria, with the economic size of Nigeria and its weight within West Africa, you realize that it becomes a little bit, it takes a little bit more than gentleman's agreement and ad hoc measures to solve disputes that come up on regular basis. And then COVID hit in full force, starting from March, and then we started to experience the type of lockdowns, curfews, border closures in different countries in Africa and across West Africa. And I recall quite well the week or the few days before the first directive of the actual lockdown in Greater Accra, how things were. And we've come from far, from that. But now to look at it from March to September, that was a long time. And even though, to the credit of His Excellency and to the leadership in the country, that has saved the lives of many Ghanaians. And you compare it against what has happened in other countries who took it more lightly, even with more economic might than any of the African countries or European countries even. Some of them just were reckless with their politics, and that they have paid the price in terms of health. Now, where we did pay the heavy cost was in terms of our economic development. And that's not just a Ghana affair, it's just across of West Africa. I believe that COVID is the latest example of an external shock that serves as a wake-up call to the African leaders about the need to bring their resources and to act together and to come together as one in order to become less dependent on external trade and on the external relations, because we have what it takes to build a functioning economy. We don't have to look too far outside of Africa to have these kinds of sustainable ties, and at the same time to make sure that we do not get that affected with any kind of external shocks. We were, as Borderless Alliance, even though we were in lockdown mode, but from our respective countries, we were part of the interministerial committee within West Africa to work on coming up with a harmonized approach to the movement across borders in order to ensure the health and the safety of cross-border trade and transportation. You know that commercial trade has never stopped.
No, it didn't stop, actually. That was what I was even coming to. Like, so if if though persons were limited, I mean, trading was going on, but not to the peak, to the level that we expected.
Right.
If you look at it critically from your perspective as Borderless Alliance, how did that affect trading?
It did affect trading in two ways. The first one is in affecting the economic growth on a country level, because you were not consuming that much. People reverted to less consumption. So this has actually affected the import and the production, because people were buying less, let's call it between quotations, unneeded stuff. People were thinking about protective equipment, about sanitizers, about food, about shelter, about these things. They were thinking less about spending on luxury items and hotels and things like that. No, even more important stuff, things that usually you would qualify among modern day necessities were suddenly no longer that useful within a lockdown period. Rather, there was a boom in terms of digital trade, and people who seized the opportunity to accelerate their transition into an electronic commerce mode of trade are the ones who found that their businesses actually increased. And this is another point that I think we need to at least emphasize between parentheses, that countries that were preparing their strategies towards self-sufficiency and digitalization found themselves on the better end of the COVID lockdown.
Wow. That
didn't save us eventually as a country from the huge effect of the economic stunting, so to say. But at least it gave us a bit of a lifesaver, and it allowed us to accelerate our growth in certain areas. You know, for example, that we were starting with initiatives like the paperless and the digitization of our e-government services long before COVID hit. And this has saved us, actually, because some countries didn't have that kind of opening. And then our mobile money platforms were also functional long before COVID hit. People were using mobile money more intensively during COVID. Maybe that is why we reached the position that we have reached today, but which I really don't want to talk about. But
so now let's look at within the context of continental free trade, because if trade is booming within West Africa, we might have a multiplier effect in other part, or knock-on effect on other part of Africa. But even with COVID in place, now we're seeing some countries are gradually easing restrictions. What do we do, the lessons we've learned from COVID, to make sure that we get a full benefit of the AFCTA?
So, as I was saying earlier, COVID is just the latest example of an external shock. The main issues to tackle are to look at adding value into your local production and manufacturing, so growing the necessities that you need from within your country instead of importing everything that you need and becoming an over-dependent country on consumption. Personally, a few months ago, I was discussing the hyper-globalization, the effect of hyper-globalization on countries becoming more dependent on consumption. People just want the cheapest product, and the cheapest product, unfortunately, comes from Southeast Asia, from China most of the time. And so we have to agree that this kind of hyper-globalization is not sustainable in the longer term, because it will lead to situations where countries will find themselves unable to compete against the huge economies of scale that are taking place at the other end of the world. But at the same time, we are at a conundrum where any disruption in these value chains will affect us even worse because, first of all, I like to say that we are located on the wrong side of Africa, because the east-west maritime trade lane, which runs from China around India into the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and then up into Europe, and then continues all the way to the US. That's the main global maritime lane from which most of the other lanes feed into. So West Africa feeds mostly from that side. As an afterthought, some can say, for example, from Algeciras or from Tanjamed in Morocco, from somewhere. So this is the way it's designed. And the disruptions, unfortunately, will continue to increase in frequency if we do not solve the low interconnectivity across Africa, and if we do not address the need to accelerate our value addition and our local industries and manufacturing. But to get that one right, and now it comes AFCFTA, which gives us an opportunity to reach out to neighboring countries on the continent. And sometimes you'll be surprised to find out that some of the products that you need are located much closer than you think they are. However, there might be some kind of cost considerations to look at. But then, look, we have to consider a situation where the sustainability will have to come in the shorter term at a premium that will ease off as we build our competitiveness and our economies of scale. Because the more you produce, the less costly it becomes when you become better at producing.
Is it not because sometimes you talk about sustainability, but sometimes you're looking at quality and the mindset that, oh, it's from abroad. That is better than what is in maybe Nigeria.
But that doesn't apply to Chinese products, you know? Yeah, and you know that sometimes some people, they cheekily say that they say American quality, Chinese price. And sometimes it's funny and anecdotal, but in fact, that's where most of the products currently cost less. Even the products that are not made in China are actually made in China. And then the value added because of the rules of origin, and then it becomes an American product or a European product or I don't know which product. Right, but and it happens in many industries, whether in electronics industries, in textile and clothing, in many industries, and it has created this kind of enormous opportunity cost for local manufacturing and production in Africa, and we have to get this one right. We have to first of all tackle African interconnectivity, and I'm talking about the logistics and the transportation networks across Africa, because currently most of these networks are not there, even though the markets are there. So a market for an African product exists across the continent in another African country. But sometimes to get this product from this country to that country is where the trade costs become very, very, very prohibitive. And we're not even talking about the financial cost because of the lack of convertibility of the currencies and things like that. So what AFCFTA does is that it combines the African markets into one market that is accessible to all. It removes the duty cost of the products that qualify as an African through the rules of origin and through its manufacturing, and then it provides an opportunity to link up these African countries, but only if you look at tackling the other issues. The first of which being the logistics, and the second will be the finance. So if you want to create this synergy with AFCFTA, you need to build a competitive local industry in Africa. Then you need to competitively move these products from the countries of production to the countries of
to where they are needed.
Yes, and then you need to identify where the markets are so that your local manufacturers and producers are helped to identify that country A or country B are in need of my product. So this is where I'm going to send them. So now let's look at how we are going to send them. And let's see how we can send them there at the least cost possible using African, and I repeat this, using African logistics and service providers.
Great, Ziad. So too soon, this how time will permit us. But I think the issue of logistics is crucial. So we need to find another time and look at it critically in the context of, the intra-regional trade, where borders are gradually going to be eased, because we're seeing that now we've been told that COVID has become a normal thing now.
We need to cope with that, right?
Yes. So let's have a wrap up today. But like I said, we're going to look at the logistics issue, be it air or by road or by sea as well, because it's very difficult.
We will also be providing venues for exploring some of these topics much more in May, where we'll be having two major conferences in West Africa. The first one will be the Borderless 2022 conference, which will take place in Abidjan on the 5th and the 6th of May. And then there will be the Africa Forum of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, which is also themed on AFCFTA Transport and Logistics. So we'll talk more about that when we find time to meet.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for hosting.
This is how time will permit us. My name is Edward Nyakun. God willing, we'll come your way tomorrow. Shalom.